A Norwegian aid agency has raised concerns about what it terms neglected crises on the African continent. The Norwegian Refugee Council says the Democratic Republic of Congo tops the list. It says women and children there pay the ultimate price, and yet their plight rarely makes international headlines. The unrest in the Central African Republic and the civil war in South Sudan are another two examples. The organization's head, Egeland, is calling for concerted efforts to end this suffering in these countries. The Norwegian Refugee Council head Egeland is in studio with me now to discuss these neglected crises on the African continent. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
You just came back from South Sudan. Share with us your thoughts on the crisis there, what needs to be done, and also talk to us a little bit more about the efforts of the Norwegian Refugee Council.
I was very worried of what I could see in South Sudan. I have followed the country now for 30 years, really. I haven't seen so many people so without food in so many areas of the country. And of course, what's at fault? It is the war. There are armed men, many different armed groups, in addition to the government forces, fighting in all across the country, really. It's very dangerous and difficult to do humanitarian work, but we are able to reach millions with our assistance, and the next 3 months will be very, very crucial, because this is the lean season. It's long since the last harvest in December. It was little that was harvested then, and people are now without food, without resources. It's a race against the clock, really, to reach them before the next harvest in September.
And we've talked about this crisis really for such a long time, for years I should say. What is it that needs to be done now? What should the international community do?
Well, we in this neglected list, we really look at 3 things. Lack of political and diplomatic will and attention, both nationally among those men with guns and power who could end the conflict, who could bring an end to the suffering, but also of the neighbors, of the region, of the international community. And there is too little of that. Secondly, we look at how much media attention there is compared to the number of people displaced. And when there are millions of displaced in many of these countries, and very scant media interest, you're a good exception of that now. Scant media attention also leads to less humanitarian funding for us, and in many of the circumstances we get half or less of what is needed to meet their needs. So all of that is needed now, diplomatic peace efforts, security and access for us as relief workers, but also more resources for our work.
All right, so let's talk about then this latest report you released, and you singled out the Central African Republic, South Sudan, as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo. What you described for South Sudan, is that the case for the other countries as well? Yeah,
they are all very similar. I mean, there is conflict, and it's been going on for a lot of time. Many armed actors, armed groups, impunity for when these soldiers attack, abuse civilians, including horrific sexual abuse of women. And then there is also no effective political process towards peace. I mean, we're humanitarian workers. We're in the middle of this crossfire with the civilian population. There are only political solutions to the wars, and yes, they are similar in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which now has 4.5 million people displaced within the country, and the Central African Republic, where there was also more fighting in more regions of late.
And talking about South Sudan, what more can China do? We know they've got troops on the ground. We know that they've mediated between rival groups, and they've got investments and influence, perhaps more than most other countries do. So would you say that China perhaps has more so with Juba than most other countries?
China is influential in South Sudan. It has a lot of economic interests there. It has been involved in the oil industry, in natural resources there. And China has actually tried to go to the government and go to the political groups and ask for peace talks. I hope that they can be even more predictable, more active. China is not only an economic power, it should become a diplomatic power for peace. And with all of its economic might, China could also help us more in our humanitarian work. How come little Norway, population 6 million, is a bigger humanitarian actor in South Sudan than China with more than 1 billion inhabitants?
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for these insights. We appreciate it. In studio with us, Egeland, talking to us about the crisis in South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Central African Republic.